Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. And as always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to episode 150 of Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host. My name is Larry Erickson. For the next almost half hour, I'm going to be your ranter and raconteur, talking about things that I think are important, that I think you should know about. As always, if you have any reactions to the show, any comments, whatever, you can email them to me directly. My email address is whoviating, WHOVIATING @AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd like. As always, if you do email me, please include something in the subject line, like, for example, Left Side of the Aisle or whatever. Something clear that I know it's not spam. And that way it won't get dumped. And also be a little patient about getting an answer. I'm slow about email, but you will hear from me. So with those required introductions out of the way, let's get to it. This being episode 150, one of those nice round numbers, I decided the first half of the show we're just going to be a little bit, it's all going to be like good news and funny things and so on. So I'm going to start with a couple of bits of good news. First off, let's start with the fact that March 4th was town meeting day in the state of Vermont. 19 towns in that state had on their agenda a resolution about whether or not to support a bill currently in the state legislature to create a state that is a public bank. 15 of those towns said yes, and that's good news, I think. The specific proposal under consideration is Senate Bill 204, which would turn an existing state agency, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, into a public bank that could take deposits and issue low-interest loans for in-state projects. Supporters of this bill note that capital projects in the state are now generally financed there as elsewhere by issuing bonds, which then involve interest and fees that are actually net costs to the state. And these costs can be, in some cases, entirely and in other cases largely avoided by having a state bank. Thing is, by the way, the only state in the United States today that actually has a state bank is the thoroughly deeply red North Dakota. That bank has been in place since 1919 and has resisted every attempt to take it down. In fact, during the economic crisis of 2008, when the entire financial industry of the world seemed to be melting down, that bank made a record profit. Which is part of the reason why, in the wake of that financial meltdown, some states have begun to see the benefits of state banking. And by the way, if a public bank, one that focuses on the welfare of the citizens of the state rather than the welfare of the wallets of investors and speculators, if that sounds like socialism, it kind of is, yeah. All right, another bit of good news. I've talked on a number of occasions about the increasing efforts among low-wage workers to force their employers to pay something, vaguely approaching a livable wage. This campaign has featured one-day strikes against, among others, Walmart, the fast food industry, and contractors at government sites like public museums and so on. The campaign is receiving support from the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU. Now, most corporations have tried to shrug off these protests, saying they're ineffective or they only involve a very small number of people, or are the result, I love this, they're the result of outsiders trying to disrupt our family. Because, yeah, after all, when the bosses tell you that you and they are just part of the team, that's supposed to make up for the fact that you're being paid sub-poverty wages with few and maybe no benefits. Well, it looks like one player, and this is the good news here, it looks like one big player in this game is starting to bend. In its 2013 annual report to the SEC, which was filed at the beginning of this month, the McDonald's Corporation says, quoting, events such as boycotts or protests, labor strikes, and supply chain interruptions can adversely affect the company's plans and, more importantly, increasing public focus on income inequality could force the company to raise wages. We certainly can hope. And in fact, we can actually do more than that. We can support the workers, support that cause, and we can promise ourselves that we will respect any boycotts that are called as part of it. All right, this next thing doesn't actually start as good news, but there's some good news in it, so just hang on to the end. Do you remember the Deepwater Horizon oil blowout? It happened not quite 4 years ago, on April 22nd, 2010. Nearly 55 million barrels, over 200 million gallons of oil spewed out into the Gulf of Mexico. 4 years later, oil from that spill is still washing up on the beaches of the Gulf Coast. The end of last month, a 1,250-pound mat of sand, shells, and oil, which was confirmed to be from the spill, was found off Pensacola Beach, Florida. That mat was 9 feet long and 9 feet wide. And speaking of nines, this was also nearly 9 months after BP, the company that owned the Deepwater Horizon, had shut down its cleanup efforts in the Gulf, claiming only minute amounts of oil remained. This is also well past the time that BP tried to weasel out of paying for the damage that it caused. And this is where the good news comes in. The corporation had agreed to set up a $9.2 billion fund to compensate people who had been damaged by the spill. But the settlement was proving to be more expensive than BP originally anticipated, and so, suffering from, what you might call buyer's remorse, BP went to court to get the conditions, the details of the arrangement changed, so that only those people who could prove they were directly affected by the spill could claim any damages. The thing is, a lot of the damage from the spill was indirect, such as the near destruction of the tourist industry in the area. So limiting it this way would actually leave a lot of people just out of this settlement or getting any compensation. Well, guess what? On March 3rd, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans rejected BP's argument, saying the company is going to have to live with the terms of the agreement as it was originally established, under which certain businesses claiming losses were assumed to have been damaged by the spill. The court ruled that the terms of the settlement, quoting, are not as protective of BP's present concerns as might have been achievable, but they are the protections that were accepted by the parties and approved by the district court. So at least in this case, at least in this one case, a corporation has been told in no uncertain terms that it cannot change the rules after the fact for its own benefit. And that is good news. All right, one other bit of good news, court-related good news, involves a guy named Dan McCall. He's an artist and a satirist from Minnesota, and a couple of years ago he reacted to the increasing revelations about NSA spying by producing this, which was appeared on t-shirts, on coffee mugs, and so on. It's a spoof of the NSA's official logo, and in case you can't read the text in the circle says, National Security Agency peeping while you're sleeping, and below that it says, the NSA, the only part of government that actually listens. Well, the NSA was not amused, so it had the Justice Department hit him with a cease and desist notice claiming copyright infringement. Well, a lot of people might have folded under that kind of pressure, but McCall didn't. Instead, with the help of the Public Citizen Litigation Group, he fought back in court, arguing that the design is clearly a satirical critique of the government's violations of the Fourth Amendment, and therefore was protected First Amendment free speech that the government is suppressing by this order. Well, last month, after a 3-year legal battle, the Justice Department issued a settlement agreement and general release. Translated from legalese, that means that the federal government just gave up. And that is good news for him and for satire. Because the thing is, satires and spoofs actually have considerable protection under the First Amendment, especially when they're used to criticize the government. So much so, in fact, that I wonder why the feds actually instituted this case for any reason other than sheer pique, and why they pursued it for so long for any reason other than institutionalized ego. And Yes, I know people come up with other more conspiratorial reasons about suppressing dissent and so on, but I've always liked the line that you should not ascribe to villainy that which can be explained by stupidity. But in any event, the point is this is an important case, because had a decision gone the other way, that could have had, whether that was the intent or not, it would have had a very chilling effect, a very limiting effect on the ability of people to use satire to criticize the government. The takeaway from the case was offered by Paul Levy, who was the public citizen attorney that took on the case. The takeaway: stand up for your rights. And I will say that whenever someone stands up for their rights, that's good news. All right, moving on from there to a quick example of something that I call unintentional humor, where something not supposed to be funny just is. The Black Heritage Organization, now this particular group, this is a group within the U.S. military. It's made up of black soldiers and officers and so on. But the Black Heritage Organization held its annual Black History Month banquet on February 22nd, described as residents and military members coming together to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. This event was described by the group organizing it as a night filled with food, fun, and fellowship, and added that the collection of diverse attendees was a testament that America is headed in the right direction. The banquet was held at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. They held it at Gitmo. All right, I have to mention this very quickly before we go to our break. I haven't talked much of late about spying. It's not because there's nothing new to report, but because other things always seem more important in the short term. But this, I just have to mention now. I can't let this go by. The Senate Intelligence Committee has been conducting a study, an historical study, of the CIA's use of waterboarding and other brutal interrogation methods, which they still refuse to call torture because it can't be torture because we don't do that. But this historical study of the CIA use of brutal interrogation methods on terrorism suspects that were held at secret CIA prisons overseas after the attacks of 9/11. The committee has been going over millions of documents which were given up by the CIA and are now held on computers in a secure room at a secret site in Northern Virginia. But the committee has now accused the CIA of trying to undermine the study by, among other things, searching the computers used by the staff of the committee. That is, essentially, they accuse the CIA of spying on the committee's work. This is where it gets funny. Dianne Feinstein, who chairs the committee, has denounced this in no uncertain terms. She called it illegal, a violation of the separation of powers, and unconstitutional. Now, Dianne Feinstein has been the biggest bootlegger, the biggest lackey of the national security state in the entire Congress. She has repeatedly defended NSA spying, it's called protecting America, and has called Edward Snowden a traitor. But when her committee is what's spied on, when it's her people that are monitored, when it's her computers that are the target, suddenly it's illegal, unconstitutional, outrageous. I expect this whole story to appear online at the website whoseoxisgourd.com. We're going to take a break. And we're back, and happily you're still there. Now it's time for one of our regular features, the Clown Award, given as always for meritorious stupidity. And our clown this week, well, he's been the clown before, I'm sure he will be again. But this week, the big red nose goes to the man who in the right wing passes for an intellectual, Representative Paul Ryan. Now, CPAC, as you may know, is the Conservative Political Action Committee, and it recently concluded its yearly confab, which is a must-go for anyone who hopes to win the favors of the fanatical right-wing yahoos who make up the most activist part, and therefore a politically potent part, of the Republican Party. So basically, it was the week of seeing who could toss the most and the reddest meat to the mouth breathers in the audience, before at the end of it all, of course, Rand Paul won the presidential straw poll, just like his father Ron Paul always used to before. Well, the thing is, however, here's the thing. The Goppers, or at least the nominal leaders of the party, have finally realized they have an image problem. So they've started to talk about, for example, reaching out to minorities. They do seem to have a problem getting the hang of it, though. This is an image of the attendance of CPAC's panel on minority outreach. But they keep on plugging away at this image stuff. They do. On another front here, they've heard about this income inequality business, and they don't quite know what to make of it. They think it's just more whining by all of those takers out there. But this is where our friend Paul Ranton comes in, because he at least realizes that Goppers have to at least look like they care about poor people. So in his speech at CPAC, he went on about how completely Republicans understand the American people, while the left is offering people, quote, a full stomach and an empty soul. Offering children, in this case, a stomach full of school lunches. Because Ryan told a story that he said came from a member of the cabinet of Wisconsin Governor Scott Walk All Over You. It was about, and I'm quoting Ryan here, a young boy from a very poor family, and every day at school he would get a free lunch from a government program. But he said he didn't want a free lunch, he wanted his own lunch, one in a brown paper bag, just like the other kids, because he knew a kid with a brown paper bag had someone who cared for him. This, Ranton finishes up with a rhetorical flourish, this is what the left doesn't understand. Now remember, this kid gets the free lunch because his parents don't have enough money to provide him with adequate nutrition, with adequate food. But according to Paul Ranton, that inability to provide a brown bag lunch every day actually proves somehow that those parents don't love their child as much as other parents who are richer than them. So that boy should go hungry every day because that will fill his soul. Because as we all know, the best thing we could do for poor people is make them poorer. Oh, but Paulie Boy doesn't stop there. Oh, no. No, because remember, he has to show that right-wingers really do care about doing something about poverty. They don't want you to go hungry. Oh, no, because they are the ones who really care, not those mean old lefties. So we had this study done. It's a study of the past 50 years of anti-poverty programs in the United States. And lo and behold, and hey, what do you know about that? The study, a 200-page document released about 2 weeks ago, the study concluded that anti-poverty programs are counterproductive and ineffective, that they've created the poverty trap, it calls, where, to refer to something that Ranton has said elsewhere, the safety net has turned into a hammock that lulls people into lives of complacency, rather than what they really should have, a life of hard work and self-reliance and the soul-filling experience of an empty belly. Except, of course, and this will probably come as no surprise to you, the report uses false information, misleading arguments, and in fact ignores its own data. There's a big false comparison this report makes. It talks about the poverty by comparing the poverty rate just before the Great Society programs of the early and mid-'60s started with now. And noting that the poverty rate now is only about 1.5 or 2 percentage points lower than it was then, saying, see, poverty programs don't work. But that's a false comparison, because right now we have programs to alleviate poverty which didn't exist then. So to make a fair comparison, we have to ask, what would the poverty rate be in the United States today if those programs did not exist? The answer is poverty would nearly double, from about 16% to about 29%, levels of poverty which approach that of the Great Depression. And what's more, the report's conclusions, that is, about effectiveness of the programs, ignore its own findings, that numerous programs actually help the poor at least get through their lives or even keep them out of poverty. For one example, the report itself notes, just one example, the child tax credit, which it says keeps nearly 3 million people, including 1.5 million children, out of poverty. You know, I don't know what he hoped to achieve by releasing this report, but one thing surely he did not achieve. He did not keep people from saying, "Paul Ryan, you are a clown." All right. On another topic, Ukraine. I said last week that I haven't talked about it, that I felt that I should, but that I haven't. There's really two reasons why I have not spent any time on this. One is a practical one. This is a situation where things do and can happen fast. It's not, well, just for example, that referendum on that supposed referendum on whether or not Crimea is going to leave Ukraine and join Russia is scheduled for March 16th, which means depending upon when in the week you see this show, that referendum might have already happened. In fact, you might even already have the results of it, because referendums, votes taken under military occupation, very often have their results returned surprisingly quickly. The point is, a situation like Ukraine is not well suited to a weekly show. But there's another reason, which is really more important. I don't feel qualified to talk about Ukraine. I don't feel I know enough about the players, about the personalities, the politics. I don't know enough about the conditions. I don't know enough about the underlying issues that provide the context in which events occur. I don't know enough to tell you anything that would be helpful to you in understanding this. Now, I do know some things. I know, for one, that Ukraine in some ways reminds me of the Roman god Janus. This is the god of beginnings and transitions, and is usually depicted as a god having two faces, with the idea that Janus is looking to the past and to the future simultaneously. Ukraine also, in that sense, has two faces, except that it's not looking to the past and the future simultaneously. It's looking to the east and the west simultaneously, looking in two directions simultaneously. The eastern and southern parts of Ukraine look more toward Russia. In fact, a good number of people in that area are ethnically Russian, and a number of them speak Russian. The western part looks more toward Europe. This has been the basic division. Part of the country is looking this way, and part of the country is looking that way. Specifically in the Crimean Peninsula, which is the focus of the current tension, the majority of people, it's a small majority, but a majority of the people in the Crimea are ethnically Russian. Now, this, by the way, does not mean that they want to leave Ukraine and join Russia. It's easy for them to be ethnically Russian and yet politically Ukrainian. In fact, the latest poll, a poll taken before the Russian invasion of Crimea, says a majority there are against uniting with Russia. And the support for uniting with Russia drops the further away from Crimea you get. But the thing is, whether or not you want to leave Ukraine and join Russia, still, this does affect whether you would prefer to see closer economic, cultural, even military ties with Russia, or closer economic, cultural, military ties with the West. The thing is, Crimea, too, also is a place that Russia has long felt to be part of Russia. Russia thinks of the Crimea as Russian, and also regards this as strategically important. A map of the Black Sea, you can see that, in fact, the Black Sea, which is where the Crimea is, the Black Sea provides Russia's only water access to the Mediterranean. It is its only, to the Russia, this is militarily, strategically vital. It's their only access to places like Egypt, for example. Another thing I know is that the protests that brought down President Viktor Yanukovych were sparked by genuine outrage over his decision to cancel an agreement about closer ties with the West and Europe in favor of a deal with Russia. And at the beginning, especially at the beginning, included many progressive people and groups who were genuinely concerned about the future of political freedom in Ukraine. But it's also true that the protest in the later stages also included a number of extreme right-wing groups and individuals and parties, including the overtly anti-Semitic political party called Svoboda. And that's pretty much all I know. That's pretty much it. But even at that, I have to say, I know how this is going to sound, but I think it's true. Even at that, I would be willing to speculate that that's probably more than at least 90% of Americans know. And that's all surface stuff. And again, that doesn't get into the underlying issues that provide the context for events. It's all surface stuff. But even at that, it's more than most of us know. Because, and if you want, you can consider this the outrage of the week this week. In foreign affairs and even in domestic affairs, we as a people are uninformed, misinformed, and malinformed. And we won't be able to understand things like the events in Ukraine, understand what's going on, understand what we should do, understand what we can do, which quite frankly, in the case of the Russian seizure of Crimea, quite frankly, probably what we can do is nothing. But we won't have any chance of understanding events like this, again, of what we can do, what we should do, until we change the fact of our profound insularity and ignorance about the world beyond our borders. And there's one other thing. Something else. Something I don't need to know those underlying facts to know. Some things I don't need to know the context to know. I don't need that context to know that military invasions are wrong. I don't need that context to know that the seizure of land by military force is wrong, that military occupation is wrong, that it is unethical, immoral, that it is cruel. I don't need to know all of the details of the history of Ukraine and the complicated ethnic divisions and ties that drive the protest and drive the counter-protest. I don't need to know any of that to say that what Russia did is morally, ethically, and politically wrong. And if there is something that can be done within the realm of economics or politics, if there is something that can be done to express a national and an international contempt for this, it should be done. It should be done. So, that's it for this week. We're out of here. We're gone. We're done. I will see you next week, hopefully to talk about some of the things that last week I said I was going to talk about this week. So you have the best week you possibly can. And until then, peace.